Hi everyone, I'm Nicole Henderson, editor at the Web Host Industry Review. I'd like to welcome you to today's session called Strategies to Reduce Operating Costs, Avoid Email Blacklisting, and Improve Deliverability. The webinar will feature a presentation from Mike Redding, Senior Director of Technical Services at Cloudmark. Before I hand the presentation over to Mike, I wanted to take care of a few things. First, questions. There will be a couple minutes at the end of the session for your questions, but if you come up with questions during the session, you can submit them through the question function in the webinar software. If you do ask a question and it doesn't get answered because we run out of time or maybe it's a bit too specific, someone will reach out to you directly after the webinar, and there will also be some contact info on screen during the Q&A period. If you want to revisit the presentation later, you can find a video archive of the webinar at www.theword.com/webinars, and that will be up near the end of the week. So to get this presentation started, I'd like to turn it over to Mike.
Thanks, Nicole. As Nicole mentioned, my name is Mike Redding. I'm the Director of Technology Services for Cloudmark, and my team's responsible for bringing some of Cloudmark's technologies to service providers. And also helping service providers solve some of the problems. One of the most common problems we hear consistently from service providers and hosting providers these days is about the problem of outbound spam. It has grown over the past several years, and it's consistently one of the top problems that people are seeking solutions for, and one of the hardest problems that they found to solve. So today I'm going to be talking about a little bit of history of where we've seen a rise in outbound spam, why spammers are taking this avenue, and some of the strategies that we typically employ to help mitigate some of these problems. Towards the end of the session, do want to make sure everyone realizes that we are offering all the attendees a outbound spam analysis for free, and we'll give you some instructions on how you can request that from Cloudmark. What we'll do is tap into our databases, our information knowledge, and give you some information about spam that we see possibly coming out of your network, and some suggestions for where that spam may be coming from, and options that you may have to improve the spam situation. So digging into the issue of blacklisting, just to make sure everyone understands what blacklisting is all about, how it arose, make sure we're at a common understanding of what blacklisting really is. In the scenario of a spammer abusing your email services, what they're doing is leveraging your infrastructure, the same legitimate infrastructure that your subscribers are using to send legitimate mails, but they've hijacked a portion of that infrastructure. And this could be your web services, CGI pages, it may be your actual email servers, or some other piece of your infrastructure. So mail leaving these servers and leaving your network is now a mix of legitimate mail as well as spam mail. That mail is destined for other ISPs around the world, and those ISPs, of course, are running their own defenses to try to protect against the spam from entering the network. One of the defenses that they run is a series of systems called RBLs, or real-time blacklists. What they're doing is they're monitoring spam coming from your network, typically by IP address, sometimes by other mechanisms as well. And as the level of spam starts to increase and crosses some threshold that each ISP or each blacklist owner manages themselves, they determine that a source of spam is considered past the threshold of acceptable use, and they add that IP address to their blacklist. In many cases, they don't necessarily just add a single IP address. They may add an entire network of IP addresses, in this case a /24, and block entire networks in one shot. And they do this because they've seen the case where they block one IP address, a spammer just moves on to another IP address, and they want to avoid that cycle of having to continually find IP addresses one by one and block them one by one. If they determine the entire network is polluted enough that it doesn't deserve the right to be able to send mail into their platform, they may block the entire platform. Once that happens, not only are they just blocking the spam messages coming from that network, but they're blocking all messages coming from that network. And that ISP absolutely refuses to accept any mail from that network, and both legitimate users as well as spammers are now impacted. The impact for the hosting provider that's trying to send these mail is their email service can no longer send mail to that ISP, and messages can no longer be delivered. So a little bit about the history of blacklisting. If you kind of look back in time from, say, 2000 to 2009, spam was on the rise, and all ISPs were looking for ways to defend their networks. And at least at that time, spam fighting was relatively black and white. There were legitimate ISPs that, for the most part, sent mostly legitimate mail, and then there were relatively well-defined spam sources, botted PCs, IPs that were purchased and leased by spammers, and the whole world was relatively black or white. So over this period of time, ISPs started to endorse the concept of blacklist. We'll identify the good sources of mail, we'll identify the bad sources of mail, and we'll build up our database and simply block the bad sources, but allow the good sources to send their traffic in. And this was very, very effective. Almost every ISP adopted this. Today, some of the largest ISP in the world still use blacklists, and over 80% of their spam filtering is actually performed by blacklists, where they're identifying the sources, confirmed sources of spam, and not accepting any mail from them at all. Well, spammers quickly realized that if they're going to gather these sources, such as infected PCs, and very quickly they're going to end up on blacklists, that was affecting their ability to send spam into the network. And what they decided to do instead is leverage some of the trusted infrastructure, such as outbound servers, rather than dedicating resources such as IP addresses and other resources that they own. So in this case, rather than very quickly getting blacklisted and not being able to send spam at all, they're basically hiding their spam payload into outbound mail servers and leveraging your trusted infrastructure to send mail into these networks. So no longer is the case as simple as black and white. Now we have servers such as outbound mail servers that still probably send mostly legitimate mail, but are now polluted with a trickle of spam and are considered gray servers. The reality is that ISPs have not given up on blacklists. Blacklists have been extremely effective. They're still very effective and still probably the #1 defense that most ISPs use. So the impact is, rather than just blocking pure spam sources, in many cases they are going ahead and blocking sources that are sending a amount of spam as well as amount of legitimate mail. And they know this. They know that there's cases where they're blacklisting legitimate outbound mail servers, but their attitude is that sending spam into their network is a privilege, and if you do not meet their acceptable use policies, you can no longer send any traffic into the mail. What they're effectively doing is putting back pressure on the senders, saying, look, I'm through with having to run my filters and try to identify spam from your outbound mail servers. We're going to put back pressure and put pain on you. You need to clean up your mail servers before I'm going to allow you to send into that network. Ultimately, what gets people on blacklists is letting spam get through your outbound servers. There are other reasons why you may get listed. All blacklists operate by different rules. Effectively, there's an acceptable use policy that's typically defined by the blacklist owner. And things like you must have a proper reverse DNS, you must send your mail at a certain volume levels. And each one of those has different criteria that possibly may cause you to get on a blacklist. But ultimately, those things are very easily solvable. What really gets you on the blacklist that's much, much more difficult to solve is if spam does exit through your servers and land within these networks. So here's some case studies of 3 operators These are all hosting operators that reside in the United States. And CloudMark tapped into its spam databases to take a look at the spam levels that we were seeing from these operators. So the operator in red obviously has quite a bit of spam problem. It started to skyrocket around in February and continued on a somewhat upward growth trajectory. The operator in yellow definitely has a bit of a spam problem. You're seeing some spikiness there where sometimes they're able to effectively filter the spam, but in other cases the spam filtering is ineffective and the spam is leaking out of their networks. And then the third operator, which seems to have things relatively well managed and under control, has leaking very, very little spam. The green line is relatively negligible. So if we take a look at some of the major public RBL databases for the exact same three providers, there's an almost perfect mapping over time of as spam leaves these networks, here's the number of IP addresses within those networks that are getting listed. So in these cases, these are hosting providers hosting a virtual private space and large IP spaces, and huge chunks of their IP spaces are being abused and listed on these networks. And the growth in listings maps almost perfectly to the leakage of spam coming out of their networks. Here's another view into blacklists. This is looking at CloudMark's own blacklist. We, of course, use this technology as well. Very, very effective mechanism to provide first-level defenses for blocking spam. And this just maps by country where we're listing IP addresses. The top country in CloudMark's blacklist is actually Romania, followed very, very closely by the United States. Romania has very, very loose spam laws, also very, very inexpensive shared hosting space, so they tend to get abused and send quite a bit of spam around the world. The United States proportionately sends actually quite a bit less spam, but has a huge IP allocation, so we see quite a bit of IP addresses in the United States listed as spam sources, including some of the IP address space of hosting providers. So looking into the cost of outbound spam, what really adds up and starts causing pain for the service provider? Ultimately, if spammers are taking over your infrastructure, they may be taking over multiple parts of your infrastructure. They could be abusing your outbound email relays and actually sending spam directly through your outbound email servers. They may be taking over your web hosting space and using PHP or CGI pages to send spam through outbound email relays. They may also be setting up shop directly on virtual private servers within your network. In all those cases, they're abusing your infrastructure, using your infrastructure as their technology to send spam out to the world. When these IP addresses end up on blacklists, they may just blacklist those individual email servers, but they may also blacklist entire networks within your IP space. The result is that your customers suffer because these spammers have taken over your infrastructure. At best, they may have their mail delayed, it may be rate limited, they may take several days to get their messages delivered, but more likely they'll end up on a blacklist and they will not be able to send email at all. And that's a critical service offered by most web hosting providers, is the ability to send email. While it may not be the primary service offered by a web hosting provider, primarily maybe offering web hosting services, web design creation services, email is still a very, very critical piece of what they expect when they sign up with your company for their infrastructure. So effectively, a piece of the service that you are offering is broken, and you're going to have to deal with customer care costs or possibly a customer that leaves your service because they feel like that your service is not performing properly. The other impact to the customers on your network is this can be very, very damaging to their brand. Obviously, if they can't send email, that's damaging to their brand. They can't reply. They can't conduct business. But the other potential impact is, in certain cases, some of these providers may actually be hosting the spams themselves. If their accounts get hijacked, and spammers take over some of their web hosting accounts. We've seen cases where they deposit the spam directly within the web hosting accounts, and at that point, certain browsers, certain URL lists will start listing their websites as possible phishing sites. And that's very, very damaging to a brand. Someone's going to visit the website, and suddenly a dialog pops up that says you may be entering a phishing site. At that point, your customers may have in turn lost a customer, and they may be tempted to move elsewhere to find a better hosting provider. So how do these costs stack up? I kind of broke it down into 3 categories. The first is infrastructure costs. How many servers do we have to add to our infrastructure just to deal with spam? Are we consuming bandwidth, extra bandwidth because of the spam? This is often the first thing that people look at when they try to stack up the cost of spam. And that's the reason for that is relatively simple. It's the most easily quantifiable piece of everything. We know the cost of a server. We know the cost of bandwidth. We do the math, and in reality, the impact of that is very, very tiny. While you may only run several servers to handle all your email infrastructure, if spam is adding 10% to that, it's a relatively tiny impact, at least to a hosting provider. For other types of providers, it's a much, much higher impact, such as a mobile network provider, where in that case they're utilizing mobile network bandwidth, which is very, very expensive. So another cost, which starts to get much more significant, is when we start to look at administration costs. Even though most web hosting providers, the administrators are performing multiple roles, they may be managing web infrastructure, and email infrastructure could possibly only be a portion of their job. If they start to have problems with outbound spam, now they suddenly have to deal with new tasks, such as dealing with blacklist removal. Anyone who's had to deal with that knows that it can be very, very painful. You have to contact the ISP or the blacklist owner that is blacklisting you, get information about that blacklist, and plead your case to see, explain to the blacklist owner why you've cleaned up your act, and often wait 24 hours to see if you can get a response and removal from that blacklist. The other impact is managing email infrastructure itself. If blacklisting or rate limiting or other problems with delivery are occurring, that means your email servers have to work harder. Their queues are going to back up. When you finally get removed from that blacklist, you may have 2 days of backlog mail, and now you have to deliver that mail, which often takes takes significant administration tasks just to be able to handle the delivery and clearing of that mail from your outbound queues. And the other thing that administrators are responsible for is finding the spammers, the hijacked accounts, the other bad things in the network that are causing these problems in the first place. So they may be responsible for writing scripts, tools, other things to identify these spammers and attempt to chase them down and kick them off their network. So the final piece of outbound spam is the impact on customer care costs. And this is one of the tougher costs to calculate, but possibly the largest cost that stacks up when looking at the total cost of spam. If your outbound email infrastructure and your outbound email IP addresses have been blacklisted, that service no longer works. It is effectively broken as far as the subscribers are concerned, and it's up to you to fix it. So they may call customer care, complaining why they can't receive email, complaining why they're getting bounces sent back to them, and those customer care costs can add up. The other cost, of course, which is also difficult to quantify but very, very significant, is the cost of customer churn. How much does it cost when a customer leaves your network because they feel like the service is not working? So to understand what we can do and how we can start to control these costs and what strategies we can take to mitigate them really helps to understand the business model of spammers. What are these guys trying to get out of that? What's easy for them to do? What's painful for them to do? And realistically, spammers are businessmen, just like any other business out there. They're running a business, and their goal is to maximize their revenue, which in their case means send as many spam messages as possible to advertise their spam website, but at the same time minimize their cost. So what does cost mean to a spammer? Well, they're using your infrastructure, your bandwidth, your servers to send the spam. So cost to them is not necessarily in terms of servers and bandwidth or other monetary figures. Cost to them is in terms of resources. It takes effort for them to steal credentials and hijack accounts. It takes effort to crack into people's PHP or CGI scripts. It takes, in certain cases, they may not even do that effort themselves. They may purchase that from a different person who took the opportunity to hijack web pages. There's a whole black market out there of people who do nothing but steal passwords, steal credentials, and then they make money by selling those to other people who use them to do other things, such as send spam. So in this case, it is a real cost to them. And those resources are very valuable. If they purchase a list of 100,000 stolen passwords, every time one of those gets shut down, you're eroding at their costs. It's down to really what we need to focus on when we're trying to mitigate some of these issues as a service provider. We want to take the opposite approach. We're trying to limit the amount of messages they get out, put boundaries around how many messages they're allowed to send, and very, very tight acceptable use policies around what's allowable and acceptable within the network. And then we want to maximize their cost. We know that every hijacked account, every stolen password, effectively does cost them money, whether it's effort or a purchased account. So in that case, we want to be able to shut those down as quickly as possible and make sure that we're making our network less attractive to the spammers. And that really is ultimately the name of the game, is you have to make sure you are not the most attractive target to spammers. And we've seen this time and time again where spammers are trying to run their business, and they're going to do it as the most efficient way as possible, which typically means let's find the most vulnerable network we can, and they'll use that to send their spam. This is a case study from 2 operators, both in the U.S., that were being abused by spammers and having their outbound infrastructure abused. So the blue operator was seeing exponential growth in outbound spam problems. We were measuring this at CloudMark based on data that we collected from outside of their network, where we could see the spam leaving their network. And we were seeing exponential growth of outbound spam from that blue operator. Sometime around April of last year, the blue operator decided to take action. They implemented some new procedures, new policies, new filtering solutions, and were very, very quickly able to bring that spam problem under control. So over the period of a month or 2, they were able to squash the spam leaking from their network. As they tuned up the acceptable use policies and tightened their procedures, they were able to eliminate most of the spam that was leaving their network. And what we saw was another operator, this operator in orange, who really didn't have much of a spam problem throughout most of 2011 and early parts of 2012. Suddenly, as the blue operator got their network under control, we could see an almost perfect shift of the exact same spam, the same spam campaign, almost the exact same spam characteristics, shifting over to a different operator. And this is simply the case of a spammer realizing, blue operator, it's not profitable for me to operate it there anymore. They're shutting down my accounts too quickly. I'm going to make my profits more effective by moving over to the orange operator. And they've continued to do that up till now. So how do, digging specifically into hosting providers, how are hosting providers abused by spammers? Hosting providers offer multiple services. They're not just offering email, ISP services, and spammers have found ways to exploit every single vulnerability within these networks and multiple vulnerabilities within these networks to send spam. Let's dig into a couple different ways that we've seen hosting providers be abused. One of the first ones, which seems to be one of the hottest topics these days, is spam coming from and originating from web PHP or CGI scripts located on your web hosting space. So in this case, the spammer is attacking directly any vulnerabilities that may exist within your web or PHP infrastructure, using those to generate mails, which then go through an outbound mail server then are delivered out into the internet. And they're attacking these servers in multiple ways. In some cases, they may find an existing legitimate CGI script or PHP page that has a vulnerability, it's been improperly implemented, and they'll go ahead and script that and take advantage of that. In other cases, they've completely taken over a web hosting account and they've installed their own PHP scripts into these accounts and have used those as spam sources that which in turn gets sent out through your outbound email infrastructure. Here's an example of a vulnerable CGI page. In this case, this page was designed to allow feedback on a website. At the bottom of every web page, there was a little link that says, send this page to your friends. You clicked on this link, you got a little dialog that popped up. And if we dig into how this page was constructed, it's of course designed to give feedback on that particular website, but you can paste any target URL into that you want. So you can actually have this same CGI script send out spam that points to a spammer's website. The person who created this did put a capture in place, but obviously spammers found ways around that because we've seen huge amounts of spams coming from this particular CGI source. It's unclear whether they've cracked the CAPTCHA. There's a bunch of technologies out there to crack most common CAPTCHAs, or it also could be that the CGI was improperly coded and there was a way to bypass the CAPTCHA altogether. Another vulnerability in this that we've seen is the form itself, of course, says you can send to up to 3 recipients, and it has little dialogues in there to type in up to 3 recipients, but the underlying CGI allows you to actually paste in up to 100 recipients. So simply having the form restrict up to 3 isn't good enough for spammers who will quickly figure out what the limits of the script were. Here's an example spam message that we saw delivered through that PHP page. In this case, it has a little bit of extra information that says someone so-and-so has recommended this link to you, but then they've, of course, put their spam payload in there to put the information of where they're really trying to get you to go to. So here's another example of web PHP abuse. In this case, this is a PHP server that has been completely taken over by spammers. This particular web hosting account allows indexing, has it turned on, so we were able to take a look inside that account, and we were able to confirm that many of these source pages were actually used to generate some of the spam that we were observing within CloudMark. Here's an example of some of the spam that we've seen sent through these hijacked PHP accounts. Interesting things about this spam is the link, or the call to action, as we call it in the spam world, that they're trying to get you to click on is actually a link to another compromised web server. So in this case, they're using not only the compromised web accounts to send the spam, but then they use the compromised web accounts to host the spam as the destination URL in the spam message itself. We know spam is a pretty large business. There's an entire ecosystem where some people are in the business of sending the message, other people are in the business of stealing credentials. This is a blog posting we picked up off of Black Hat where someone is advertising the fact that they have technology that can take over web hosting accounts, and they're willing to sell that technology to you or sell the actual accounts that they've taken over. Web PHP Form Spam, or hack domain spam as we call it within CloudMark, has been taking off. This is one of the reasons why we've received quite a few requests in the past 6 months for solutions to some of these problems. Over the past 6 months, we've seen a dramatic increase in the amount of hijacked web server accounts that are being used to send spam or host the actual spam itself. So another form of spam that affects service providers, if you offer email infrastructure and you offer your ability to send emails directly out to that infrastructure, spammers, of course, have taken over some of these accounts. They've stolen the passwords associated with these accounts, and they're using those to send directly out through your outbound mail servers. In some cases, they're connecting directly to those outbound mail servers. In other cases, they may have scripted your webmail accounts and are using the webmail interface to send mail out to the internet. To get these stolen accounts in the first place, it almost always comes down to inbound phishing attempts. I think every mailbox provider in the world has seen phishing messages such as this one. In this case, they're advertising, or they're telling the subscriber it looks like it came from a Comcast administrator, and they're telling the subscriber, your account's about to expire. You must go reset your password here in order to keep your account activated. They're certainly not trying to steal your Xfinity credentials to be able to pay your Xfinity bill for you. What they're, of course, doing is stealing those credentials so that they can send SMTP spam out of the network and utilize the outbound mail infrastructure. So another form of spam that's really unique to hosting providers is virtual private server spam. And this is in a different category by itself. In all the other cases, it was flowing through your infrastructure, your mail servers, and being sent out to the internet. In the case of virtual private servers, you're offering virtual server space to these providers, and they're allowed to install whatever they want on it. They can install Microsoft Exchange, they could install Postfix, they can install their own spamming software. And there's really two major abuses going on of virtual servers. In some cases, spammers obtain stolen credit cards or other mechanisms to obtain access directly to the virtual server itself, and they set up shop. They set up their spamming software directly on the virtual servers, and they send spam directly to the internet. And just in the case of blacklisting before, many operators and blacklist owners have taken the practice of blacklisting large amounts of virtual server space. So much in certain operators or certain hosting providers, so much of the virtual server space, virtual IP space has been taken over by spammers that many blacklist owners have decided to blacklist all virtual server space and only punch holes to allow certain well-known servers to operate within those networks. The other case of virtual server space being an issue is not necessarily the spammer taking over the virtual server itself, but possibly they found an exploit in whatever was set up on that virtual server. With virtual servers, you're up to the mercy of the people who have purchased that server to set up their whatever software they've installed correctly, and many of them don't do that properly. They may set up an open relay for email. They may improperly set up some web server software. And in that case, spammers are constantly looking for exploits and the ability to leverage that and take advantage of that. So what can we do about to help mitigate some outbound spam? And I've kind of divided this into two parts. First is architecture. We need to make sure we're setting ourselves up to be able to intercept this traffic, be able to properly take action on it. Once we've done that and the architecture supports that, then we can take a look at some of the best practice policies to apply to this to make sure we're limiting the damage and preventing the type of blacklisting problems that can happen with operators. So first thing we need to do is we need to make sure we're in a position to intercept the spam itself. In the case of outbound SMTP relay, that's probably not a problem at all. All mail flows through your email servers. You already have access to apply spam filters, apply policy, and take action on those mails. But in other cases, it's not quite so straightforward. In the case of a virtual server sending spam directly out to the internet, they're not using your email infrastructure. They're only using your IP space, and you need the ability to intercept that traffic and take action on it. Once we have the ability to intercept it, the other thing we need to be able to do is annotate it. By annotate, I mean your network has quite a bit of information about how the spam was generated, about how every message was generated, where it came from, what IP address hit the PHP page to generate the spam message, which PHP page was responsible for generating a message. All that information is very, very valuable for multiple reasons. is valuable to spam filters. Spam filters can use that information to help refine their filtering, identify bad spam sources, identify patterns, and block the bad spam leaving your network. It's also very, very valuable to you. If that spam happened to leave the network, all the large ISPs have this concept of feedback loops where ultimately they want to get that information back in your hands so that you can do something about it. If you annotate these emails by adding in X headers to describe which PHP generated that email, that information can get back to you, and you can use that information to help identify compromised accounts within your system. Let's dig into a couple examples. So in the case of a CGI web server, we want to make sure that no matter how that mail is generated, whether it's generated off PHP, a CGI script, or something that calls send mail directly, we need to make sure that gets intercepted and routed through our anti-spam infrastructure. And there's a couple ways to do that. It depends on your web hosting environment, your CGI environment. In the case of PHP, there's configuration settings. In other cases, we've had some web hosting operators replace send mail with a wrapper script that captures the messages that normally would have gone to the send mail SMTP server. It captures them and sends them off to the outbound anti-spam email servers. There's also settings within these infrastructures to have them annotate emails by adding extra information to the emails before they get sent out to the internet. In PHP, there's a configuration setting called mail.addXheader that adds extra information. cPanel has a couple similar settings as well. So here's an example of an email from a hosting provider that has these settings enabled. And what I've highlighted in yellow is this extra information that's been added by enabling these features. So in this case, we know exactly which PHP script generated this message. We know the IP address of that connected to the web server to trigger this PHP to generate this message. And we also know quite a bit of other information about this message. All of this is super valuable to us. It's super valuable to companies like Cloudmark in terms of spam filtering, and it's super valuable to you in terms of finding the bad accounts that you can use to shut down these accounts. Another set of traffic that we need to make sure we're properly intercepting is your outbound SMTP relay. This isn't a problem at all because, of course, your subscribers must connect through these relays to send mail anyway. But one of the things you should do on these relays is make sure you enable them to add extra information to these messages before they go out to the internet. Many ISPs, many hosting providers allow subscribers to authenticate as one user, but then send mail as a different user. So a subscriber could authenticate as joe@hotmail.com, but then send mail as jane@aol.com. If you don't add and record that information, and that spam message leaves your network, but then gets reported back to you, you may never know who the actual account owner is that sent that mail. So what we highly recommend is use all the information in your network, add that to these emails, and that's going to provide traceability to get that information back to you. Critical information such as the authenticating user, as well as the account ID that originally sent that mail. So the last category of traffic that we need to make sure we're intercepting properly is spam from virtual private servers. In this case, it's a little more difficult because it's not going through your email infrastructure. By default, it's going directly out to the internet. What we recommend is the implementation of a transparent SMTP proxy. What that allows is within your routers, you set up a port 25 policy-based route, and any port 25 traffic that is leaving one of these virtual servers, you have the ability to route through a transparent SMTP proxy. What that proxy does is it acts very similar to an MTA, but it's operating in a completely transparent mode. The server on the left-hand side, the virtual private server, still thinks it's talking directly to the internet, but all that traffic is being proxied through this server, and you have the ability to block the spam and allow the good messages to go through. Once you have the ability to intercept that traffic, now you have to figure out what you're going to do with it. And properly blocking spam is more than just installing a content filter and hoping for the best. We have to properly apply policy. We have to define acceptable use policy. We need to make sure we're properly controlling spam and putting boundaries to limit any damage for spam that may leak these networks, but also make sure we're providing the right information to the content filter to be able to block the spam in the first place. So overall, your goal as a best practice is to put up some barriers. You're going to make it difficult for them to send large amounts of spam. You're going to put a barrier up if they try to use behavior that is very indicative of spam. And what your goal ultimately is to force them down the path of least resistance, which is hopefully not your network, but somebody else's network. And that's really the name of the game of most outbound policies, is to restrict and put boundaries around what they're allowed to do with the goal of making your network less attractive for this type of abuse. So I divided up some of the policy best practices into what I'm going to just call the basics. These are things everybody should be doing, everybody should be tracking. This is kind of anti-spam 101. And the simplest things you should be doing would be to establish some static limits. And these will vary depending on whether the messages are coming from PHP pages, whether they're coming from outbound SMTP relay. But you want to limit the number of recipients per message. You want to limit the number of concurrent connections per IP. And you want to do some basic rate limiting. You need to make sure that each entity, an IP address, a PHP page, or some other sending entity within your network, has a limit on the number of messages that it's allowed to send over some period of time. They can send a max of 300 messages an hour, or a max of 1,000 messages an hour. You need to have some boundaries, otherwise spammers will take over and send up to the absolute limits. The other best practice that's kind of a no-brainer that you should be doing is applying content filtering to all these messages. One of the things that is probably apparent to a lot of people who have experienced outbound spam problems is Spam Assassin, while it's wonderful, it's free, it typically does not cut it. And the reason is, if you can go out and download Spam Assassin for free, tweak it a little bit, and figure out how to make it stop spam, spammers can do the exact same thing. They can download it. They can figure out what spam will bypass most Spam Assassin filters and Spam Assassin settings, and now they have the ability to bypass just about every piece of protection you're getting out of Spam Assassin. And these guys absolutely do that. They contain test accounts. They send test messages through your network to verify it's getting through, and they can make sure that this stuff will make it past most things that you can provide at them. The other best practice that is absolutely critical, I probably should have moved this one all the way up to the top, is to subscribe to feedback loops. So all the big operators, AOL, MSN, Yahoo, operate what are called feedback loops. So when spam leaves your network, maybe you missed it, your spam filters didn't catch it when it left, subscribers at Hotmail, at Yahoo, at AOL have the ability to report that spam by clicking on a button within the interface. When you subscribe to a feedback loop with these operators, those operators will very happily give that data back to you. They want you to do something about your outbound spam, so they're going to give that information back to you with the hope that you will use it in some effective way to block future spam from hitting their networks. In many cases, if you end up on a blacklist from some of these providers, they actually may make that a condition for you to get off their blacklist. The last piece that's also kind of a no-brainer but is amazingly ignored is to make sure you're monitoring and taking action specifically on feedback loop data. I can't tell you how many ISPs we've worked with where they've struggled with blacklists, they've done what they thought they could by signing up for feedback loops, and they're still getting on blacklists. And the first thing we ask them is, well, what are you doing with the feedback loop data? And 9 out of 10 times the answer is, well, we collect it, but we're not really using it for anything useful. That is super valuable data. These are ISPs that are telling you, here's spam we've discovered, please do something about it. If you're not using that data, then you're not effectively using everything that's been given to you to block spam, and you may very well end up on their blacklist again. So moving up the notch in terms of policy, if we go beyond the basics, that will hopefully mitigate some of the simplest spam problems. As things get more complex, simple static limits, applying a static rate limit to the number of messages per day, messages per hour, may not be enough to cut it. And part of the reason is you have a complex business. You may have some accounts that need the ability to send lots of mail, other accounts that are free accounts that don't need to send a lot of mail. And the technique we've observed that's very, very effective to creating categories of these different types of subscribers is to use a class of service model. Monitor who's your default subscriber, what do you expect people to send by default, identify activity that's considered suspect, and let's put tighter restrictions about that, and then identify that very, very small percentage of your legitimate customers that need to send very, very large amount of mail. In most cases, 99.99% of subscribers fall within a very, very small set of boundaries. They follow a very, very typical pattern and send mail in a very predictable way. So it's only that tiny, tiny fraction of subscribers that you need to worry about and put tighter boundaries around. And those tiny, tiny fractions are also the same set of boundaries that spammers will try to abuse. So moving on to more advanced techniques, there's quite a bit that can be done within policy. And this is where you're looking for very, very specific patterns and restricting more complex activities, such as multiple authenticated logins all coming from the same IP, or multiple IP addresses all using the same logins. All these characteristics are pretty obvious spamming activity. They may be difficult to implement depending on what type of software you're using, but are extremely powerful in detecting spam, whether you're doing it automatically directly within your infrastructure or possibly doing it after the fact by having scripts that look at logs and examine for this type of activity. So the last topic I want to hit relatively quickly is how do you measure outbound spam? How do you know that you're doing a good job and that you're not boiling up to a breaking point that might get you back onto a blacklist again? One of the things that's difficult about outbound spam is it's really not your problem. It's left your network. At that point, your filter said the message was legitimate, and you have no idea what happened to that mail after. It's someone else's problem at that point, and they have to deal with applying their spam filters. So it's very, very easy to ignore the fact that spam may be leaving your network or not even be aware that spam is leaving your network. And this is the exact opposite of inbound, where it's a problem for you, it's a problem for your subscribers, and there's a million different ways to measure the impact of spam that may be affecting your subscriber, but it's much, much harder to identify spam that may be leaving your network and affecting other subscribers. But there is data. That does not mean that all hope is lost. There is quite a bit you can do to manage and create some metrics based on outbound spam. And the first one and easiest one is to take a look at those feedback loops. Measure how many feedback reports you're getting for spam that left your network, and just keep a simple chart of are they starting to increase? That probably means there's more spam's leaving my network. I better take a look at that before it gets me onto a blacklist. There's also third-party services out there, some that you can just go query for free. Centerbase, run by Cisco, is of course a popular one. Return Path gives you some basic information about the score that they've observed, and Return Path even offers some premium services where they'll help dig into some of your deliverability issues and help you figure out how you can clean that type of stuff up. The other thing that people often monitor on outbound is they just take a look at filtering rate. Am I filtering enough now? Well, I'm filtering 3%, so that seems pretty good, and things must be okay. The problem is filtering rate is completely deceiving. It doesn't tell you what you've missed. It only tells you what you've caught. So is there a way to detect what you may have missed? It sounds somewhat simple, but one of the things we've actually been doing quite frequently with customers now is finding ways that we can estimate how much spam left the network. The way we do this is what we call retrospective log analysis, where we keep signatures based on the spam that left the network and store that in log files. And then 24 hours later, we can go back and look at those log files and determine, did this signature that we initially thought was legitimate, did the spam filter now think that was spam? And we can calculate the fact very, very precisely that this message was spam, did in fact leave the network, and we'll know exactly how many of these spam messages left the network. So this gives you very, very detailed metrics on exactly what may have left your network, lets you monitor that, see if there's a certain upward trend, and give you a very, very early warning that spammers are starting to take over certain parts of your infrastructure, and you're getting close to ending up on a blacklist. So the last piece I mentioned early on is that we're also happy to do an outbound analysis for you. CloudMark processes huge amounts of the world's internet email traffic. So we actually have a pretty good picture on where these spam sources are. There's a good chance we actually know quite a bit of information about your networks, possibly more about the spam leaving your networks than the network owner themselves. So we'd like to take advantage of, we'd like you to take advantage of this. We'll try to run a report based off our databases, give you information about the type of spam we see, the top IP addresses, whether these IP addresses are landing on our blacklist, and give you some indication about what type of, where we think that some of the problems lie, and where the spam sources may be. So if you're interested in this outbound analysis, what you need to do is email Holly, and her email address is there. If you get in contact with her, she'll coordinate collecting all the information we need to run that analysis. Essentially what we're going to need is we'll need to know the IP addresses that you use to send mail out to the internet, the IP space that you use for your virtual private space, or any other blocks of IP addresses that we can do research on, and we'll be able to provide a report back to you. So that wraps up some of the information. Kind of went through this pretty quickly. There's, of course, lots more to talk about when it comes to outbound spam. So we have a little bit of time for questions, but also feel free to go ahead and email me directly. My email address is up there if you would rather ask some questions over email. And Holly's email is up there as well. And if you want to request the free outbound spam analysis, feel free to email Holly.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Mike. That was a great presentation, and we really got a lot of detail and technical analysis as well, so that's great. Just a reminder, if you want to submit questions, the question function is directly in the webinar software, so you can do it there, or you can email Mike or Holly to receive your free outbound spam analysis. It looks like we have about 5 minutes left, and I've got a few questions here. The first question for you, Mike, is how do I manage these risks on a multi-tenant environment?
Sure. So most web hosting providers are going to be multi-tenant by their nature. You're using shared web hosting space to host multiple people on that infrastructure. They are sharing the same outbound email servers, and it is a huge problem. One of the things you can do is possibly consider separating the infrastructure and dividing it into premium subscribers that are on your network. That these are the people paying the most money. They have the largest, some of your largest accounts, and maybe they get dedicated infrastructure, and then everything else stays on different infrastructure. The other thing you could consider as well that we often set up is you don't necessarily need to have to dedicate servers just for this. Depending on the software you use, you may be able to have a single piece of infrastructure that has multiple IP addresses associated with it. And even though it's one physical server, each IP address is used for a different class, or possibly even a different customer viewers. And some of the premium customers may get their own dedicated sets of IP addresses for sending their outbound mail out to the internet.
Okay, great. We've got another question here. Many hosting providers are very small, less than 10 employees. What would a transparent SMTP filtering solution cost for a firm of this size, even if they're processing 10 million messages a day of outgoing spam, roughly? Thanks. That's from Ken.
Ken, Well, we won't get into commercials here. There's a couple of different transparent solutions out there, a couple of different vendors. CloudMark, of course, has one as well. We license it by bandwidth, so ours is licensed based on the amount of traffic that we're filtering. So if it is predominantly spam traffic, you would be paying to filter that traffic. But what we could do is look at other mitigation strategies to try to limit that. This is very similar to one of the slides I showed earlier. Is your goal is to make your network less attractive. And while initially you may be filtering a lot of spam, ultimately, the hope is that spammers are going to find your network to be very ineffective, and you'll see a decrease in that spam traffic because none of it's ever going to actually make it out. And hopefully that'll keep licensing costs down.
Okay, great. And this is a question that's kind of related, but how do I justify the investments in a filtering solution while email is just a throw-in to our customers and we don't make that much money with it?
Yeah, it's very true with hosting providers. At least the ones I've talked to, most of them, to be honest, view email as a secondary thing. Their primary business is hosting web servers, hosting virtual space. But email is absolutely critical to that. Anyone who's setting up shop on your services expects email to work, especially if they expect a business presence there. So while it may not be the primary service, it's an absolute critical piece of that service that you're offering. And if we go to the cost stuff that I went through before, there's a very good chance that if your email services are effectively broken because there's too much spam in that network, that you may lose some of those subscribers. And you can do the business ROI case, to estimate how many subscribers you may lose and use that to justify the cost of implementing some filtering solutions.
Okay, great. We've got a couple minutes left. I have a question here from Graham. How do you control outbound mail on VPS that you do not have root access to on managed VPS?
As long as you have access to your network routers, you still have the ability to intercept that mail. So on VPS, ultimately that traffic has to leave your network in some way. Most routers have the capability, or load balancers have the capability of implementing a policy-based route. So in that case, as long as you own those network routers, which I hope you do, you implement that policy to route all port 25 traffic through a transparent proxy. We can then scan the traffic, apply policy to it, and then let it go out through the internet. So it really doesn't matter that you have actual access to the server itself. You're using your network infrastructure to alter the routing.
Okay, great. I've kind of a related question. What do you do with SSL traffic from VPS hosts?
SSL is going to be much, much more difficult to pass. I mean, at that point, if it's port 25 traffic, which would be the standard for inbound or mail leaving your network destined for inbound servers, by default, port 25 traffic is unencrypted. If it is SSL traffic, you typically have to pass that through. But that tends to be the not the primary source of spam within these networks. In most cases, it's unencrypted port 25 traffic. It is someone pretending to be a server sending unencrypted to another service provider and sending spam out to the internet.
Okay, great, thanks. So that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank everyone for attending and for submitting your questions. And of course, I'd love to thank Mike for this great presentation.